So just some further ideas to challenge you to think about your own organisations and what you're achieving in there. Just come back to where I first started a couple of hours ago this morning, this leadership culture performance connection. Building a little bit of detail around that for you, because I did say it's a very simple, simplistic chart. Firstly, leaders have direct impact on the culture. So I directly impact the culture of my own organisation through such things as my own unconscious beliefs, how I think about people, how I think about things, the behaviours that I use, and therefore what behaviours I license other people to use, and how I role model, as it's called. And in terms of my impact on others, what expectations do I send to people about how they should behave to fit in as part of this organisation? There's more than simply those three, but I thought those are probably the three key ones to keep it brief. And in turn, the organisational culture now sends back organisational beliefs to those in leadership positions and non-leadership positions, obviously. This notion of norms and expectations, so the behavioural norms, how do people believe they are expected to behave? What do you have to do around here in order to fit in and get ahead? And what gets rewarded? So this is important when you're looking at a culture for innovation, for instance, if you want to use that phrase. What gets rewarded is being innovative, but in fact there are a number of organisational requirements, and I talked at length about this at last year's conference, that need to be in place in order for the organisation to be innovative. So one of the traps, again, we're falling into with this culture for is we're jumping to the end and we're looking at the outcome and focusing on trying to develop that, where the outcome is a consequence of doing certain things appropriately inside the organisation, and that's what we need to focus on. Leaders also have an indirect impact on culture, and we often forget about this, and this is the beauty of Rob and Janet's research. It showed what this indirect impact is. So most of the leadership development that you go to nowadays is about you as a leader. It's looking at your direct impact, your style, your personality, your behaviours, or whatever, etc. But whilst these culture things stay constant at the bottom, now leaders impact culture indirectly through how they talk about what the organisation stands for, how the decisions that they make about structures, systems and job design. So, systems, again, coming back to what gets rewarded, we talk constantly about teamwork and cooperation and collaboration and all that kind of stuff, and yet we consistently continue to reward people as individuals. So they're sending conflicting messages regarding what's expected of me. So I get rewarded as an individual, but I have expectations to work together collaboratively. So these decisions, performance appraisal systems, goal-setting systems, selection and training systems, all those kinds of things, and how we design jobs. And last and not least is how we communicate upwards and downwards. So those of you in the industry, I urge you to think about this indirect impact and get conversations going amongst the executive groups around how they talk about that kind of stuff. Let me give you an illustration which just shows you the cascading impact of leadership on organisational culture and vice versa. This is a slide I showed about four conferences ago, and it was based on an actual client's data. So I just need to walk you through the tools without going into any detail. It uses two tools, leadership impact and management impact. In the leadership impact tool, when I'm doing my questionnaire, I'm describing how would I like you folks to behave as a consequence of my leadership, otherwise known as what is my ideal impact. And I also say, and how do I think I lead? What do I do in terms of envisioning, role modelling, influencing, managing performance and all these kinds of things. You give me feedback on how you believe you are expected to behave as a consequence of the way I lead, and by the way, how do you think I go about these leadership things? So it's the notion of impact. Rather than personal styles, it's the impact I have on you and the behaviour that I create expectations of from you through my leadership. So, bit of background. So here's the top executive group, the senior executives, first two levels. When they're describing an ideal impact, they want you to behave very constructively. Lots of that blue stuff, not much of the green and red. Here's their actual impact. It's not quite so constructive. It's a blob because it's a large group of people described by 10 or 12 people each, so it aggregates. But as you can see, there's more of the blue and red and less of the blue than they wanted. And that's very typical and very normal, by the way. It's the way humans function. But here's the kicker, because the next tool is the management impact instrument, which is now the people at middle management levels saying, so what behaviours do I want my people to use as part of my management? And see what's happening. They're still saying all this constructive stuff, but the green and red stuff's coming out now. So what they're saying is, I want you to behave very constructively, but hey, around here you've got to be very oppositional. You've got to be fault-finding and critical. That's how you get brownie points around here. You've got to compete at 9 o'clock. You've got to compete with others to be seen and noticed. So I want you to be very constructive, but you've also got to do this green and red stuff. You've got to do this passive, defensive, aggressive. So what they're doing is they're idealising defensive styles as the way you need to behave around here. There's an old saying that I'm sure you're familiar with, beware what you wish for, because that's what you get. I cannot create expectations for you to be both constructive and defensive. So it's significantly safer to be defensive than constructive. So therefore the impact that these middle managers are having on their people is actually be defensive. Passive, keep the boss happy, don't piss off the wrong person, don't rock the boat, don't threaten the status quo, be sure you're not in the wrong place at the wrong time to get into trouble. But at the same time, you've got to compete with everybody, etc., etc., etc. Now, at the same time as we did this organisation did the culture survey, and the senior executives described their ideal culture, very constructive. Here's the actual culture. Notice the similarities between the two right-hand profiles. Direct relationship between leadership, impact, and organisational culture going round and round and round. Changing culture is not easy. It's very, very difficult. In fact, Machiavelli, that David quoted, talked about the risks associated with people who are driving cultural change in an organisation. And one of the reasons it's hard to change is it's hard to see. So a reasonable analogy is the iceberg, that the top part is the what's going on and the bottom part's the why, what's going on. And when we look at what's going on, we see visible artefacts, so it's what people wear, the foosball tables in the cafe, whether there's a cafe or not, and all this kind of stuff. The climate, in terms of how people feel, the engagement kind of stuff. The climate in terms of what people see going on, so we work well in teams, we get the ability to influence decisions, whatever it might be. And the espoused values, our famous 5 core values, whatever they might be. But sitting underneath that are these norms and expectations and the underlying beliefs and assumptions. They're difficult to see on a day-to-day basis. Right? Now what we know from our own research and observation is that the what stuff is easy to see, it's easy to change, it's what in fact most organisations act on, and it is a reasonable predictor of short-term performance. But sitting under that, it's harder to see, it's harder to change, but it is a better predictor of performance over the long term. We know that scientifically, empirically. So that's why we measure culture, to make the intangible tangible, and when you can see it, you can do something with it. And so I just want to step aside from the presentation momentarily to celebrate and congratulate the organisations that have managed to transform their cultures. These are organisations that have undertaken a survey, shown to be less than ideal, if you like, typical, and they've put a lot of effort in, and they've been outstandingly successful, and they have transformed their organisation into constructive cultures. So we honour those organisations each year by giving them awards. And so this year's Cultural Transformation Awards go to KFC, SHAPE, who are office outfitters, possibly did your office building, Southwest Credit down near Melbourne, Credit Union, and of course Swiss Wellbeing, you'll be very familiar with that brand. So congratulations to those 4 companies. And as Jen talked about, you can develop a very strong, whatever you want to call it, constructive culture is the phrase that we would use, but at the same time you can lose it, you can destroy it, because it's that interplay between the leaders, the leadership and the culture on an ongoing basis. So we further award those organisations that have achieved this culture transformation and have sustained it and maintained it. So this year's Culture Sustainability Awards once again go to Kennard Self-Storage and Mangara Recreation. Those of you that have been to numerous conferences over the long term will remember Sam Kennard's remarkable presentation some years back, about the change undertaken with that organisation, and they really have excelled. And they've excelled in a very tough industry, and it never fails to amaze me that the number of times they bought up a competitor who has been performing very poorly and turns them into a top-class performance. So this culture does count. Culture is about performance. It's not just about nice to have, which of course it is, but it really is about freeing up people in the organisation to be able to perform. So I ask myself in thinking about this presentation a very simple question: why is culture change so damn difficult to achieve? Because I look at a long list of organisations that retest, and we apply the mathematical formula and we determine whether they've met the criteria for transformation or not. So a simple proposition to put in front of you. We know from empirical research what causes the culture to be as it is. We can survey these folks' wonderful tools to identify what needs to be done. And we have numerous case studies in Australia, around the world, of organisations that have successfully changed their culture. You've just seen some examples there. So why don't they simply change? Here's the proposition. Really is. It's like David Morrison saying, but that's the way it is. Because you have to appreciate, with all respect to people like David and any CEO for that matter, if the CEO and the senior people have been in the organisation for quite a long time, they are the people who have excelled in that current culture. So to change it, you're actually changing something that's been part of your life, and it's not easy. So I want to go back to the definition of organisational culture, the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. We have a slightly more technical one. It means the same, it is the same. It's the shared beliefs, norms and expectations that govern the way people approach their work and interact with each other. Could be expressed as how the organisation system motivates people to do things, or it's what behaviours are rewarded and punished. And so I just want to focus momentarily on the beliefs part. Because again, in thinking about what I would talk about this year, I mean, we have all the evidence about what you need to do to change culture. Right? It's all there. So why doesn't it happen? And one of the things, given the fact that the biggest barrier is the culture itself, is the beliefs of the people at the top end of the organisation. So I started to think about those beliefs and look at them in terms of lenses. And so here's my non-scientific list of lenses that I've seen over the years, expressions that CEOs, senior executives have made that I believe inhibit culture change. The old if in doubt, restructure strategy, right? So it's a structural lens, so that the executives see everything in terms of the structure. So we've got a problem, we need to restructure it. And it's essential, and these words are all important, it's essential to control, maintain control and order. So rather than thinking about people, they think about structure. The simplification lens, so this sort of, dare I say it, almost engineering type accounting belief that if we can make work simple, you stupid idiots out there can't screw it up. The specialisation lens, if we make jobs very specialised, that will improve efficiency and productivity. Actually, there's little evidence scientifically to support that notion. The process lens, you've got to have the rules. You've got to have the procedures and all this. So that's the first thought. That's not going to help you with culture change. The tough lens, we've got to set targets for people that they can't achieve to keep them on their toes, kind of stuff. The uniformity lens. God, if I let you work from home 2 days a week, how do I know you're not skiving off watching television all day? And any of you who do work, say 4 days a week or work a day or two from home will probably know that you work 6 or 7 days a week under such a situation. So this differences are challenging. This is the issue with diversity, that it is about creating uniformity, and organisational structures are actually designed to create uniformity. I talked about that last year. And the people won't work, who's heard the expression, if they won lotto, they wouldn't come to work, would they? This belief that people only work because they desperately need to pay off the mortgage. So alternate lenses that I've seen over the years that facilitate culture change. The symbolic lens, the leaders that understand that everything they do has a meaning, and the importance of the symbolic meaning of what they do. It's not so much what I do, but how you interpret what I do that matters. The doing something meaningful lens. This is Gordon Ken standing up on the stage 20 years ago, 17 years ago. and talking about, I just can't see some young kid in my organisation as chief executive of Lion Nathan being excited getting out of bed in the morning, saying, I'm going off to work today to make Lion Nathan the most successful and profitable alcoholic beverages organisation, etc., etc., etc. But if we talk about sociability and making the world a more sociable place, that might get them excited. So Gordon became and was a chief executive who believed that people need to do something meaningful. So how can we make this work meaningful for them? The simple believe in people lens, that people do generally want to do the right thing. It's in their nature to strive. The diversity lens. Diversity makes organisation performance better. The enabling leader, so the servant leadership kind of thing, that's closest to the situation, know more about it than I do, so really we should ask them what they think. And the work should be fun. You're a hell of a long time dead, so you should enjoy what you do out there. How can we create that situation? And again, these are things that people have said, talked about and done on my years that I've seen help culture change. So lesson number one, if you like, is culture change is more likely to be achieved when it includes transforming the way leaders think about how organisations create performance. Remember, the fundamental obstacle to changing culture is the culture itself. Part of that is the leadership thinking. Coming to the next bit, the norms and expectations. I'm going to show you, it's about a 3-minute video clip, which tells the story about what a norm is better than I can.
To answer that question, we set up a hidden camera experiment to see if this woman would stand up at the sound of this tone, simply because everyone else is. You might be thinking you'd never go along with this. Or would you? After just 3 beeps, and without knowing why she's doing it, this woman is now conforming perfectly to the group. But what happens if we take the group away?
Elaine, please.
Okay, now she's alone. The crowd is gone and nobody is watching her, except our hidden cameras. What do you think she'll do? She's now conforming to the rules of the group without them even being there. Now, watch what happens when we introduce another outsider who doesn't know the rules.
Have a seat and they'll be out in just a couple minutes. Great, thanks so much.
Everybody was doing it, so I thought I was supposed to.
Think she'll teach the new guy what to do? We kept the cameras rolling as more unsuspecting patients arrived. And slowly but surely, what began as a random rule for this woman has now become the social norm for everyone in this waiting room. Here to explain what's going on in their brains is Jonah Berger of the University of Pennsylvania.
This sort of internalized form of herd behavior is part of what we call social learning. Starting at a very early age, when we see members of our group perform a task, our brains literally reward us for following in their footsteps.
When I saw everybody stand up, I felt like I needed to join them. Otherwise, I'm like excluded. Once I decided to go with it, then I felt much more comfortable.
Conformity is how we become socialized, but it can also cause us to develop bad habits or repeat past wrongs.
And it's why even this rebel, who wasn't standing for any of this nonsense, eventually joined the ranks. And the only thing more shocking than seeing how easily conformity affects the way you act is that similar forces are subconsciously shaping the way you think right now.
For those that like just a little bit more technicality around this stuff, that's what's called a descriptive norm. So I'm sure some of you out there are sitting there with a really painful back or neck right now that would probably rather be standing up. But you sit down because everybody's sitting down. So descriptive norm is what you do because everybody else is doing it. Organisational culture also involves what's called injunctive norms, which is what you should do, you have to do, you can't do. So they create these expectations around what you have to do and what you can't do. But these norms are everywhere, they rule our life. I mean, if you walk up to somebody and put their hand out, your hand out and say, "Hi, I'm Shaun," what are they going to do? They're going to shake your hand. But that's what you do when somebody comes and puts their hand out and says, "Hi, I'm Shaun." So why do we shake hands? I mean, this culture goes on even when we don't know why we're doing it. There's all sorts of urban myths around why we shake hands, but why don't we tap elbows or tap ankles? Why do we shake hands? I mean, it's supposed to show that I'm not holding a weapon, but it doesn't tell you I've got one hidden behind my back, does it? That's the urban myth. So these norms control every aspect of our life. So as the guy from Wharton said, it's about reward and reinforcement. So people get rewarded for doing what is expected. So if our brains reward us for doing that, how do we reward behaviours we want to see in our new organisational culture? And this comes back to Rob Cook, Dr. Robert A. Cook's How Culture Works model, a simplified version of which was in your bag. It's by examining how our current organisation structure, the organisation systems, the job design, e.g. autonomy, communication processes up and down, and leadership skills and quality all combine to create these norms and expectations, and what behaviour is currently rewarded, determining what needs to change to reward the desired behaviours. Okay? So if we can look at what are we doing now, what behaviour is that now driving, what behaviour is that now rewarding, is that the behaviour we want to reward? If not, what do we need to change it back here in order to reward the behaviours that we want to grow throughout the organisation? So culture change is more likely to be achieved when it includes transforming the way we organise the business and design systems to motivate people to perform at a high level. So we come back to where we started from. The stories we tell ourselves, I think that's a great line. This interplay between leaders, how I function as a leader, both directly and indirectly impacting the people that I lead, and how I in turn reflect and represent the culture. And this duality of influence, this constant revolving cycle of influence between leadership and culture and its implications for performance. So the stories this morning have given you fantastic illustrations around that. Katie Kelly with her exceptional achievement, Michael Combs with his remarkable work with career trackers, Jen White at Avnet Technologies, her own personal story of going through a number of different cultures, Rob Cook in terms of some of the research behind the whole notion of organisational culture, and David Morrison's personal experience over probably 40 years within the Army. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you for previous speakers that are here. I can't see past the second row of seats, so if you're out there, please come and say hi afterwards. Thank you for coming. Thanks to all the Human Synergistics staff. This takes 9 months to organise and 3.5 hours to do. So we now have 3 months where we don't need to think about a conference. And all the very best in your efforts to help your organisations and your client organisations grow. Thank you.